She had lived a quiet, simple life for many years, the kind of life that went unnoticed by most people around her, yet full of small joys that made each day meaningful. Her home was modest, a little house on a quiet street, with creaky floors and windows that let in a golden morning light. She did not have much in the way of money or possessions, but she had something rare, a kind heart and a calm spirit that made her neighbors respect her, even after losing her husband, who had been her companion for decades. She never let grief consume her completely, instead carrying on with courage, waking up each morning, cooking her small meals, tending to her tiny garden, and keeping memories alive in her heart. Life had not been easy for her, and it was never meant to be extravagant. She had worked hard for every small comfort she had, saving little by little over the years, not for luxury but for security, in case of emergencies or old age. Her $10 legacy, now all that remained from her late husband's modest savings, seemed tiny in the eyes of the world, but to her, it represented love, care, and the years of shared dreams. Even though it was small, she treated it with respect, thinking it could help her by something useful, maybe medicine or a small gift for a neighbor. She never imagined anyone would mock her for it. Every day, she would go about her routines with quiet dignity, yet in her heart, a small worry always lingered. People often overlooked widows like her, assuming that their lives were simple and unimportant. She had felt those stares, the subtle whispers, and sometimes the outright jokes, but she had learned to ignore them, focusing on what mattered, her inner peace and the small acts of kindness she could give to others. But the world had a way of testing patience, and little did she know that her small $10 legacy would soon become a reason for ridicule, drawing the attention of someone who had never known humility. Despite the modesty of her life, she had dreams, quiet ones, like seeing her late husband's old letters safely kept, planting flowers in spring, and making sure the neighbors felt cared for. She loved sharing stories with the children who ran past her garden, teaching them about the past, about kindness and honesty. She found comfort in these small connections, in knowing that even though life had taken much from her, she could still give and inspire. Yet the world outside her garden was harsh, and people often judged value in numbers, not in character. One morning, as she counted the last few dollars of her modest inheritance, she felt a strange mix of gratitude and sorrow. She remembered the times when her husband had smiled at her, whispering that even the smallest things could hold meaning if they came from the heart. The $10 he had left was symbolic, a token of care, a reminder that even in loss, one could still have hope. She held on to it tightly, not because of greed, but because it connected her to love, to memories, and to a sense of continuity in a life that had already given so much. Her neighbors sometimes laughed about her frugal habits, teasing her gently, yet she never minded. She had learned long ago that respect and dignity were not measured by money, but by how one faced life's challenges. She had a resilience that people admired quietly, even if they never said it out loud. Her struggles were not dramatic to outsiders, but for her, each day was a quiet battle, balancing grief, survival, and the hope of something better. Every small choice mattered, and she carried herself with a quiet pride that made even the simplest days feel meaningful. Little did she know, the world was about to intervene in a way she could never have expected. The $10 she held so dearly, the sum that others might have laughed at, was about to catch the eye of someone who would turn her life upside down. She had no idea that soon, she would be forced to step into a situation that tested her patience, her courage, and her faith in justice. Yet in her heart, she remained hopeful, because she had learned the most important lesson of life, that kindness, courage, and patience could carry a person further than money or power ever could. And so she lived quietly, waiting unknowingly for the twist that would soon arrive, a twist that would reveal that her small $10 legacy was only the beginning of a story far bigger than she could imagine. He was the complete opposite of the widow, a young man born with everything life could offer, the kind of wealth that blinded people to reality, and power that made him believe he was untouchable. From the moment he walked into a room, his presence demanded attention, not because of charm, but because of arrogance. He had grown up in mansions, surrounded by luxury cars, designer clothes, and endless servants who did everything for him. He had never learned the meaning of struggle, responsibility, or humility. Everything in his life came easy, and he believed that made him superior to everyone else. When he first heard about the widow and her small $10 legacy, he couldn't help but laugh, not softly, but in a way that made people around him uncomfortable. His friends joined in the laughter, egging him on, not realizing, or not caring, that they were humiliating someone who had never wronged them. To him, the widow's life seemed ridiculous, outdated, and almost comical. He didn't see her as a person with memories, struggles, or dignity. He only saw her as an obstacle to mock, a way to prove that money determined worth. He would visit the estate, not to offer help, but to flaunt his superiority, showing off his expensive clothes, expensive cars, and expensive lifestyle. Every glance he gave her carried the weight of judgment, every word he spoke dripped with condescension. $10, he had asked once, smirking. That's all she has? That's laughable. His laughter echoed in the quiet halls where she had lived peacefully, and for the first time, she felt the sting of being truly underestimated. People whispered about him in the streets and in social gatherings, some admiring his confidence, others fearing his arrogance, but his attitude toward the widow went beyond ordinary pride. It was cruel, almost theatrical, as if he needed to prove to himself that no one could ever rise above him. He mocked her not out of necessity, but because he enjoyed seeing others feel small, and he believed wealth gave him the right to do so. Yet, beneath the polished suits and designer watches, there was a fragility he refused to acknowledge, a deep insecurity that made him lash out at anyone who reminded him that life wasn't always fair. His family had shielded him from hardship, making him think he was untouchable, and the widow, with her quiet dignity and modest inheritance, was a target for him to assert dominance. He underestimated her in every way, believing that kindness, patience, or intelligence could never compete with his money and arrogance. Every encounter between them became a display of power versus humility, a silent battle that the billionaire's son thought he was winning effortlessly. He would speak loudly in front of neighbors, pointing at her small inheritance as if it were a crime to have so little. Each laugh, each insult, pushed her further into the shadows, but little did he know, his arrogance was setting the stage for a downfall that no money could prevent. Even his friends began to notice that his behavior was extreme, that mocking someone so powerless required more than confidence, it required cruelty, yet he ignored every warning, his ego feeding on the humiliation he inflicted, convinced that nothing could touch him. That was his greatest mistake, because arrogance can blind even the richest to the truth, and the widow, though quiet and small in the world's eyes, was about to teach him a lesson money could never buy. For now, the billionaire's son ruled the room with his laughter and disdain, unaware that every sneer, every mock, was part of a story far bigger than he could imagine, one that would challenge his pride, his assumptions, and ultimately, his very understanding of wealth, value, and respect. His arrogance shone brightly, but little did he know, it also made him vulnerable, and the smallest inheritance in the world was about to shake the foundations of everything he thought he owned. The lawyer arrived quietly, almost like a shadow slipping into a room full of noise, but his presence was impossible to ignore. He wasn't flashy, he didn't wear expensive suits or drive luxury cars, yet there was something about him that demanded respect, something sharp in his eyes and calm in his demeanor that immediately made people notice. Unlike the billionaire's son, he didn't feel the need to prove himself with wealth or arrogance. His power came from knowledge, patience, and the ability to see things others overlooked. When he first met the widow, he noticed her modesty immediately, the gentle way she moved, the careful handling of her few possessions, and the quiet dignity that refused to be broken even under ridicule. Most people would have dismissed her as insignificant, someone not worth attention, but he saw her differently. He saw potential, intelligence, and resilience, qualities that money could never buy. The lawyer had heard whispers about the billionaire's son's cruelty, the mocking of her $10 legacy, and he knew that this was more than just an ordinary injustice. It was a test of character, a moment that could change the course of her life if handled with care. He approached her gently, not with promises of instant fortune, but with words of encouragement, telling her that sometimes the smallest things hide the greatest surprises. At first, the widow was hesitant, unsure if she could trust anyone, especially someone new in her life. She had lived cautiously for so long, always guarding her heart against disappointment. But there was something about the lawyer's calm confidence that made her listen, that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, her $10 legacy was more than it seemed. The lawyer began to investigate quietly, carefully, going through old documents, letters, and records that most people would have overlooked. He had a methodical mind, trained to see beyond the surface, and soon he started uncovering hints of something extraordinary, a hidden estate, a secret inheritance that had been kept away from prying eyes, a fortune that had been lying in wait, quietly, until the right person claimed it. While the billionaire's son continued to flaunt his wealth and mock the widow, the lawyer worked silently, building a plan that no arrogance or money could stop. He explained to her that patience, knowledge, and courage could turn even the smallest $10 legacy into something unimaginable, and the widow felt a flicker of hope, a spark that she hadn't felt in years. The lawyer's approach was different from anyone she had ever met. He didn't rush, he didn't lecture, he guided, slowly revealing the possibilities while teaching her to trust herself, to see her own value beyond the ridicule of others. She began to realize that the $10 was never the problem, it was the world's perception of it, and with the lawyer's guidance, that perception could change dramatically. As the days passed, the widow grew more confident, not because of promises of wealth, but because someone finally believed in her, someone saw her worth, her intelligence, and her resilience, qualities the billionaire's son had never recognized. The lawyer's quiet determination became a shield for her, preparing her for the moment when the hidden estate would finally be revealed, and when the arrogant son would have no choice but to face reality. By the time the billionaire's son realized the lawyer had entered the picture, it was already too late. The widow was no longer just a figure to mock, no longer someone he could belittle. The seeds of change had been planted, carefully and deliberately, and soon they would grow into a revelation that would shake the foundations of his arrogance. The lawyer had arrived not just to help, but to turn the story upside down, proving that intelligence, patience, and justice could overcome mockery, wealth, and cruelty. And as the widow began to see her potential and the hidden possibilities in her $10 legacy, she understood that her life was about to change forever, not because of money, but because someone finally recognized her true value. The day the widow and the lawyer stepped onto the path that would lead to the hidden estate, the air seemed charged with a quiet electricity. As they walked through narrow lanes and overgrown trails, the widow could hardly imagine what lay ahead. Every step was filled with anticipation, a strange mix of fear and hope. She had lived her whole life quietly, never expecting fortune or recognition, and now, with each step guided by the lawyer, she felt as if she were walking toward a secret the world had tried to hide from her. The lawyer moved with purpose, yet there was a gentle patience in his pace, knowing the widow needed time to process, to accept that something remarkable was within her reach. "This isn't just about money," he said softly, "it's about reclaiming what was always yours, hidden but never lost." The widow clutched the edges of her worn coat, trying to steady her racing heart. The $10 legacy that had once seemed insignificant now felt like a key, a small token leading her to a treasure she never knew existed. Finally, they arrived at a large, ancient building, half covered with ivy and shadowed by towering trees. It was beautiful, silent, and almost secretive, as if it had been waiting patiently for the right person to claim it. The lawyer handed her a set of old keys, worn with age, and explained that these unlocked more than doors. They unlocked a story, a family secret carefully concealed for decades. The widow's hands trembled as she took them, not from fear of the unknown, but from the sheer weight of possibility. As the doors creaked open, the widow stepped inside, and a wave of emotion swept over her. The rooms were filled with artifacts, letters, and belongings she had never imagined, yet somehow, they all felt familiar, like echoes of her late husband's life and dreams. She wandered through corridors that whispered stories of the past, each object revealing fragments of a legacy that had been kept hidden, not to deceive, but to protect until the right moment. The lawyer explained that the estate had been carefully managed over the years, hidden from those who might misuse it, including the very billionaire's son who had mocked her. The $10 she had thought trivial was only a small piece of a far greater inheritance, a symbolic beginning that led to something much larger. She realized then that her life, her patience, and her quiet perseverance had prepared her for this moment. The universe, in a way, had tested her, and she had passed. Every room she explored revealed more surprises, valuable paintings, rare collectibles, and letters that contained stories of her husband's intentions for her and their family. She read each note slowly, savoring the words, understanding that the true wealth was not just in material possessions, but in the thoughtfulness, planning, and love behind them. The hidden estate was a testament to legacy, foresight, and the quiet power of those who act with integrity. Meanwhile, the lawyer observed quietly, guiding her without rushing, allowing her to discover the estate at her own pace. His strategy had been simple: reveal the truth carefully, let the widow claim her confidence and understanding, and prepare her for the moment when the billionaire's son would learn that mocking her was the gravest mistake of his life. By the time she had walked through every hall, touched every artifact, and read every letter, the widow felt transformed. She was no longer the timid woman the world had underestimated, nor was she defined by a $10 legacy. She was the rightful owner of a hidden estate, a treasure trove that spoke not only of wealth but of respect, dignity, and justice finally realized. As they left the estate that day, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land. The widow felt a deep sense of closure and anticipation. Her journey from mockery to discovery was complete, yet she knew the story was far from over. For the billionaire's son, unaware of the estate's existence, the moment of reckoning was approaching, and soon, his arrogance would collide with the reality he had ignored for far too long. The hidden estate was no longer a secret, and the widow, guided by the lawyer, was ready to step into the next chapter of her life with courage, dignity, and the power of a legacy finally unveiled. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, almost like a storm waiting to break. The billionaire's son entered the room with his usual swagger, completely unaware that the world he thought he controlled was about to shift beneath his feet. He expected to see the same timid widow he had mocked so mercilessly, the same woman whose $10 legacy had been a source of endless laughter to him, but instead, he was met with a calm, confident presence that unsettled him immediately. The widow stood tall, her posture steady, her eyes clear and unwavering. She no longer seemed small or insignificant. There was a quiet strength about her, a certainty that came not from wealth, but from understanding her true worth. The lawyer stood by her side, a silent reminder that intelligence and preparation could outweigh arrogance and privilege. The room felt heavy with tension, every second stretching like a rope pulled tight. You can't be serious," the billionaire's son stammered, trying to mask the first flicker of doubt crossing his face. "That $10, he stopped himself, as the lawyer gently laid out the facts, detailing the hidden estate, the careful planning of her late husband, and the fortune that had been waiting for her all along. Each revelation landed like a hammer, shattering the foundation of his arrogance. The widow watched quietly, letting him absorb the truth. Her patience had been tested for years, and now it was his turn. Every word of the lawyer cut through the arrogance he had carried like armor, exposing the shallow arrogance beneath. The billionaire's son's smirk faltered, replaced with confusion, disbelief, and eventually, a flicker of fear. For the first time in his life, he was confronted with something beyond his control, something that no money or influence could fix. As the details of the hidden estate were revealed, the valuable properties, the carefully preserved documents, the letters filled with love, care, and foresight, he began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. He had mocked what he thought was small, trivial, and unimportant, failing to see the legacy, intelligence, and courage behind it. Every laugh, every insult he had directed at the widow now felt hollow and meaningless. The widow finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You thought $10 defined me, that it made me weak, that you could measure my worth in dollars and cents," she said, letting each word settle into the space between them. "But you were wrong, completely wrong. Wealth is not only in coins and notes, it is in courage, patience, and dignity, things you clearly have yet to understand." Her words were measured, precise, and piercing, leaving no room for argument. The billionaire's son's face reddened, a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and confusion flooding his expression. He realized that mocking someone was not a display of power, but a reflection of his own insecurity. His laughter, once cruel and triumphant, was gone, replaced with silence. The people around, who had once admired his arrogance, now looked at him differently, seeing the humility he had yet to grasp. The lawyer closed the confrontation with a simple remark, calm but firm: "Justice is not about humiliation. It is about restoring what is rightfully yours." The widow nodded, not triumphantly, but with quiet satisfaction. She had waited patiently, endured ridicule, and now, with dignity intact, she had reclaimed what had always been hers. As the billionaire's son slowly stepped back, the weight of realization pressing down on him, the widow understood that this moment was more than a revelation. It was a turning point. A life that had been ridiculed for its simplicity had proven that strength, intelligence, and courage could overcome arrogance, and that the smallest legacy could lead to the greatest triumph. The confrontation ended, But its impact lingered, like a lesson written not in words, but in experience. Both parties would leave the room changed forever, one humbled, the other empowered. The widow's journey was no longer just about discovery. It was about justice, respect, and the quiet victory of patience over pride. And as she stepped away from the billionaire's son, her heart was lighter, her confidence unwavering, ready to embrace the life she had always deserved. After the confrontation, the widow felt a strange, almost surreal sense of calm. The tension that had weighed on her for years seemed to dissolve, replaced by a newfound confidence. She had endured ridicule, mockery, and doubt, yet now, standing in the aftermath of truth and revelation, she realized that patience and dignity had brought her further than anger or revenge ever could. The hidden estate was no longer a secret, and with it came a freedom she had never imagined. She wandered through the halls she had once explored with curiosity, now with a sense of ownership. Everything that had been kept from her, carefully preserved and hidden, belonged to her, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it through resilience, courage, and trust in those who guided her. The billionaire's son, humbled and quiet, had faded into the background, a reminder of how arrogance could blind even the richest. He had mocked her $10 legacy, not understanding that wealth alone could never measure a person's worth. The widow now stood as a living testament to the truth that strength comes from character, integrity, and perseverance, and that even the smallest fortune, when combined with patience, could transform a life completely. Her neighbors, who had watched the drama unfold from a distance, began to notice the change, not just in the estate, but in the woman herself. She moved with purpose and confidence, her demeanor calm yet commanding. A quiet power radiated from her, one that didn't rely on showy displays of wealth, but on the undeniable sense that she had claimed what was always rightfully hers. The lawyer, always observant, watched with satisfaction, knowing that his guidance had helped her not only uncover the estate, but also discover her own strength. She had learned to trust herself, to act with intelligence, and to confront injustice with patience and dignity, and now, she could step fully into her new life without fear or hesitation. The widow began to make plans for the estate, not out of greed, but with purpose and vision. She decided to restore the property, preserve the history within its walls, and use the resources she now controlled to make a positive impact, helping those who were overlooked or underestimated. Just as she had once been, her $10 legacy, once laughed at, had become the seed for a life filled with opportunity, security, and purpose. Friends and family who had doubted her now looked on with admiration. Seeing a woman who had been mocked rise to claim her rightful place was inspiring. It was a reminder to all that patience, intelligence, and perseverance were far more powerful than arrogance or cruelty. The widow's triumph was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and profoundly meaningful, a victory rooted in dignity rather than spectacle. Even the billionaire's son, once so full of confidence, could not ignore the lesson. His arrogance had been shattered, and he had witnessed firsthand that wealth without respect or humility was meaningless. He had underestimated the widow, and in doing so, he had learned that true power comes not from money, but from wisdom, courage, and integrity. For the widow, the triumph was deeply personal. She no longer felt small or insignificant. She had endured, she had trusted, and she had emerged stronger. The estate was more than just a hidden fortune. It was a symbol of justice, of resilience, and of the rewards that come to those who face life with patience and courage. As she stood on the estate grounds, feeling the cool breeze and the sunlight on her face, the widow smiled quietly, knowing her journey had only just begun. She had reclaimed her legacy, proven her worth, and discovered the true meaning of strength. Her triumph was complete, not just in wealth, but in spirit, dignity, and the undeniable knowledge that she had overcome the ridicule and injustice of a world that had once underestimated her. The days that followed the widow's triumph were quiet, yet full of reflection. She spent her mornings walking through the estate, noticing details she had missed before, the way sunlight fell through the windows, the delicate carvings on the furniture, the scent of aged wood and paper that spoke of history. Each moment reminded her that life was made of small details, often overlooked, yet capable of teaching the most profound lessons. The billionaire's son, humbled and shaken, became a living example of the consequences of arrogance. His confidence had been built on wealth and privilege, but the confrontation had revealed a truth he could not ignore. No amount of money could replace integrity, respect, or patience. He had mocked what he did not understand, underestimated what he could not see, and in doing so, He learned that character outweighed coins in any meaningful measure of value. The widow herself reflected on her journey, realizing that every struggle, every moment of doubt, had prepared her for the triumph she now enjoyed. She understood that resilience was not simply enduring hardship, but choosing to face it with patience and wisdom. Her $10 legacy had been laughed at, but it had been a test of perception, a reminder that even the smallest beginnings could lead to great outcomes if nurtured with courage and intelligence. She also recognized the subtle power of humility, observing that those who belittle others often do so to mask their own insecurities. The billionaire's son's arrogance had blinded him to truth, yet the widow had never needed to prove herself through force or anger. She had waited, observed, and acted with clarity, allowing justice and circumstance to work in her favor, showing that quiet strength could outlast loud arrogance. The lawyer, who had guided her every step, became a teacher in ways she hadn't fully realized at the time. He had shown her the importance of strategy, foresight, and calm determination. He had also demonstrated that true mentorship was about empowering others to see their own potential, not simply solving their problems for them, and the widow internalized this lesson. The greatest victories come when knowledge, patience, and courage align. Beyond wealth and victory, she learned that the true measure of life was not in what others thought of her, but in how she conducted herself. Her dignity had never depended on approval, yet it had inspired respect and admiration once she claimed her rightful place. The experience reinforced the idea that every act of integrity, every choice made with honesty, would ultimately shape the path ahead, far more than temporary judgment or ridicule ever could. Her reflections extended to those around her, too. She noticed neighbors, friends, and even strangers responding differently, drawn to the quiet confidence she now radiated. Her journey had become a lesson for others. Patience can turn ridicule into respect, humility can outshine arrogance, and small beginnings can blossom into profound outcomes. She realized that her story was bigger than herself. It was a story others could learn from, a living example of how resilience, courage, and integrity shape lives. And finally, she learned the value of perspective. The $10 legacy she once thought small had been symbolic, a reminder that what seems insignificant to the world may carry the weight of destiny. The mockery, the doubts, and the struggle were not setbacks, but stepping stones, preparing her for the moment when justice, patience, and courage would converge to reveal the truth. As she stood on the estate grounds one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the widow understood something profound. Life's greatest lessons are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for the patient, the observant, and the brave. And she smiled, not out of triumph over others, but from the quiet joy of understanding, of learning, and of knowing that she had not only claimed her legacy, but had discovered the wisdom that would guide the rest of her life. The widow walked through the estate one last time that evening, the golden light of the setting sun spilling across the polished floors and the ancient walls. Everything felt different now, as if the house itself recognized her, welcoming her as the rightful owner. She paused in the grand hall, letting her fingers brush over the carved railings and the smooth surfaces, feeling a connection to the history, the legacy, and the story that had been waiting for her to claim. Her life had been transformed in ways she could never have imagined, and yet, in many ways, she remained the same, quiet, kind, and humble. She carried herself with dignity, but now there was a lightness to her step, a confidence that radiated without arrogance. The ridicule she had endured, the sneers from the billionaire's son, and the whispers of the world no longer held power over her. Instead, they had shaped her, tested her, and prepared her to embrace this moment fully. The hidden estate was more than just wealth or property. It was a symbol of justice, patience, and the power of perseverance. Each artifact, each letter, and each room told a story of care, thoughtfulness, and love, and the widow now understood the deeper meaning behind her journey. It was a reminder that life often hides treasures in the most unexpected places, waiting for those who are patient enough and courageous enough to find them. She thought about the billionaire's son, who had mocked her so openly, and felt a quiet sense of closure, not anger, not revenge, but a calm understanding that arrogance could never triumph over integrity, humility, and resilience. His lessons were hers to remember as a cautionary tale, a reflection of the dangers of pride and the limits of wealth when disconnected from character. The lawyer stood beside her, quietly smiling, knowing that his role had been to guide, not to take, to reveal, not to impose. His strategy had worked, but the real victory was hers. She had grown into someone who could face life with wisdom, courage, and clarity. her triumph was not just material, it was deeply personal, emotional, and spiritual, a transformation that no one could take away. Over the following weeks, the widow began to settle into her new life, but she did so with purpose and vision. She restored the estate, preserving the stories of the past while creating a future filled with possibility. She reached out to her community, offering support and kindness to those who needed it, and quietly became a symbol of strength, patience, and hope. Her $10 legacy, once mocked, had sparked a journey that reshaped not only her life, but the lives of those around her. In her heart, she carried the lessons of the journey, the power of patience, the value of humility, the importance of resilience, and the truth that wealth alone never defines a person. It was not the fortune that transformed her life, but the courage to endure, the wisdom to trust, and the perseverance to claim what was rightfully hers. Each day she walked through the estate with a sense of gratitude and wonder, knowing that her journey had been extraordinary, not just for the wealth she discovered, but for the strength and insight she had gained. And as the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow across the estate, the widow smiled quietly to herself, knowing that she had not only reclaimed her legacy, but had also discovered the deeper treasures of life, courage, wisdom, and self-respect. Her journey from ridicule to revelation, from mockery to triumph, had ended not with noise or spectacle, but with quiet dignity, a life transformed forever. The estate stood as a testament to patience, intelligence, and integrity, and the widow knew she had been prepared for this moment all along. She had endured, she had learned, and now, she could live fully, freely, and proudly, stepping into a future shaped not by others' opinions, but by her own courage and wisdom. The story of the $10 legacy was no longer about what was small, but about what was possible, and she would carry that truth with her for the rest of her life.